No money, no test drive. That's what the salesman shouted, loud enough for the whole luxury dealership to hear, before laughing in her face. He had no idea who the woman in the plain pink cardigan really was, or what was about to happen next. Because in just 1 hour, her billionaire husband would walk through those same doors, and everything would change. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about power, respect, and what happens when you dare to sit down in a world that tries to push you out. Now, before we dive deeper, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you so much, and now, let's get back to the story. No money, no test drive. The words echoed through the sleek, sunlit showroom like a slap. Conversations halted. Every polished shoe in Sapphire Prestige Motors seemed to stop mid-step. Claire Bennett stood still, her fingers brushing the curved frame of a black Revell GT, its paint glistening like obsidian under the showroom lights. She turned slowly to face the man who had just said it. Sean Carter, a tall, sharply dressed salesman with teeth too white to be trusted, and a cologne cloud that arrived before he did. His forced smile barely masked the satisfaction he took in making a scene. Claire didn't blink. "I beg your pardon?" she asked softly, her voice calm, so calm it almost sounded like a threat. Sean's gaze swept her outfit with a performative sigh. White cotton blouse, soft pink cardigan, flat shoes. Not a designer label in sight. No diamond earrings. No expensive handbag. No high-gloss veneer. Just a woman who, to him, didn't belong here. "I said," he repeated, louder this time, "no money, no test drive. That's policy." Claire smiled gently, as though she were looking at a child who didn't understand the game he was playing. Around her, the other salespeople had started whispering. 2 leaned against a metallic blue coupe, watching with folded arms. A third subtly took out his phone, perhaps already recording. It was just after noon in San Francisco, and the sun glared off the glass walls of Sapphire Prestige Motors. Inside, the scent of rich leather and polished chrome saturated the air. Claire had walked 3 blocks to get here, on purpose. Her husband had offered to drive her. She'd declined. It was important that she walk in like anyone else. Because today, Claire Bennett wasn't here as the co-owner of the Bennett Automotive Group. She was here as a nobody. She turned back to the Revell GT and placed her hand on the hood with reverence. Sleek lines, hand-stitched leather interior, top-tier driver assistance. It wasn't just a car, it was a statement. And Sean Carter had decided, in less than 5 seconds, that she wasn't the kind of person allowed to make it. "I'm interested in this model," Claire said, her voice composed, her smile kind, "and I'd like to arrange a test drive." Sean's practiced posture stiffened. "The Revell GT starts at $115,000, he said, dragging out the number like it was meant to wound. Claire didn't flinch. "That's fine. I just think," he continued, "we might have other vehicles more aligned with your budget." There it was. The calculation. The assumption. The prejudice cloaked in helpful customer service language. Claire had seen it before. 15 years in customer service, real customer service, not the glossy, pretense-laden theater of luxury retail, had trained her to recognize the signs. The flick of the eyes to your shoes. The subtle lean away. The lilt in the tone when someone thinks you're beneath them. She gave a small nod, as if his insult had been useful data for a report she was compiling. "I'd still like to drive this one." "I'm afraid I'll need approval from the finance team," he replied, stiffly now. "For vehicles at this price point, we require proof of funds. You understand?" "I do," Claire replied smoothly. "Would you like to see my bank app?" The man blinked, but before she could reach into her pocket, he cut in. "Actually, I think I'll bring in our sales manager." Claire raised one brow. "By all means." Sean led the way, keeping 2 paces ahead, deliberately, not walking with her, never equal. Claire took her time, strolling past luxury sedans and SUVs that gleamed like oversized jewelry cases. Every car here had been curated for excess, for status, and yet here she was, a quiet storm in pastel, walking through like she already owned the place. Because she did. Well, her husband did. Technically. Marcus Bennett, founder of Bennett Automotive Group, had finalized the acquisition of Sapphire Prestige Motors just a week ago. The staff didn't know it yet. Only upper management had been informed. The public announcement wouldn't come until tomorrow, when the corporate inspection team arrived. That made today the perfect day to visit unnoticed. As they approached the glass-walled office, Claire could already see the manager inside. Bradley Simmons. Mid-50s, square jaw, salt and pepper hair, brushed back with precision. He looked like someone who practiced his smiles in the mirror each morning. "Mr. Simmons," Sean said, not even pretending to hide his exasperation. "This customer, Amelia, wants to test the Revell GT. "It's Claire," she corrected gently. "Just Claire." Bradley didn't rise, he simply gestured to the chair in front of his desk. Sean remained standing behind her, arms crossed. Bradley folded his hands. "Now then," he said, like a father about to explain why Santa Claus wasn't real. "The Revell is one of our top-tier models. I understand your interest, but our policy—" "I'm familiar with your policy," Claire interrupted. "You require verification of funds." Bradley smiled tightly. "Exactly. We have to protect our assets. I'd be happy to show you my account. Even so," he continued, the condescension thick as fog, "these vehicles have ongoing maintenance costs and insurance premiums. We prefer to ensure they're a good fit for a client's lifestyle before arranging a test drive." Claire's hands folded in her lap. "Would it be more fitting if I were wearing Louboutins?" He blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Or if I had arrived with a man," she added lightly. "Would you have offered me a test drive then?" Bradley's face stiffened, but before he could respond, Claire pointed toward the showroom. "That gentleman over there, jeans and a polo, he's about to test the Revell, correct?" "He's a pre-qualified client," Bradley replied without looking. "Convenient," Claire said. She stood. "Then I suppose I'll wait for someone else who might treat me with the respect you've reserved for him." As she turned to leave, Sean called after her. "Ma'am, we're just following policy." Claire stopped, slowly turned back. "No, Mr. Carter, you're following prejudice. The only policy I've seen here today is one that punishes people for not looking the part." And with that, she walked to the customer lounge, her back straight, her expression calm, her dignity entirely intact. She sat down, pulled out her phone, not to scroll, but to observe. She would wait. Because within the hour, everything in this building was about to change. Marcus was on his way, and when he walked through those doors, the entire dealership would find out exactly who Claire Bennett really was, and why judging her had been the biggest mistake of their careers. "You sure you don't want to wait until tomorrow? We could drive up together." Marcus had said that morning from the bathroom, his voice echoing over the sound of running water. Claire had been folding her cream-colored blouse with a reverence reserved for memories. She placed it carefully into her overnight bag, just beside a soft pink cardigan, the same one she was wearing now, seated in the customer lounge of Sapphire Prestige Motors, an unwanted guest in the empire she quietly helped build. She remembered smiling then, zipping her bag with care. "And miss my spa day with Jennifer? No chance. Besides," she'd said with that spark in her eye, "I want to check out the new acquisition before you arrive." Marcus had emerged from the doorway, towel around his waist, salt and pepper hair catching the golden morning light. "Just remember," he had said, "nobody knows you there. I haven't even met the staff myself yet." "That's the point," Claire replied, standing to kiss him on the cheek. "Your corporate inspection team arrives tomorrow, but today, I want to see how they treat a regular customer." He had chuckled, shaking his head. "Mystery shopping my own dealership. You're ruthless." Claire had shrugged, grabbing her car keys. 15 years in customer service before I met you. You taught me how to scale an empire. I taught you how it actually runs." "Fair," he'd said with a grin. "Just don't get arrested." And now, here she was. Not in handcuffs, but certainly on trial, judged silently by a gallery of high-end salespeople with polished teeth and empty empathy. Her crime? Not looking expensive enough to exist in their world. 45 minutes had passed since Bradley Simmons, the sales manager, had dismissed her with a tone so polite it bordered on cruelty. Claire hadn't moved from the couch. She scrolled through her phone casually but observed like a hawk. The patterns were undeniable. Men, regardless of dress, were greeted with interest, sometimes enthusiasm. A man in cargo shorts and sneakers had just left for a test drive in a platinum sports model. Women were met with polite skepticism, smiles too stiff, tones too carefully measured, but when a woman dressed simply without visible wealth, they weren't customers. They were suspects. Claire had taken notes. Mental ones, of course. The way Sean Carter's mouth twisted when he spoke to her. The way Bradley leaned back in his chair, performing authority. The whispers from the staff after she walked out of the office, the smirks, the eye rolls, the practiced exclusion. She had seen this kind of behavior from the other side of the desk. Before Marcus, before the success, Claire had spent over a decade in retail management. She started on cash registers, worked graveyard shifts, broke up fights in back rooms, trained teams, redesigned floor plans. She'd once managed 6 stores across 3 states. She knew customer service culture from the inside out, and what she was witnessing here wasn't just arrogance, it was infection. The kind that eats a brand from the inside until there's nothing left but glittering rot. A glass door opened and a gust of cold air swept into the lobby. Claire glanced up from her phone, and for the first time in an hour, her heart lifted. Marcus had arrived. He stepped through the main entrance of Sapphire Prestige Motors like a ripple cutting through still water. At 6'1", dressed in a charcoal suit tailored to frame his quiet power, Marcus carried no briefcase, no badge of authority, just presence. The kind that couldn't be taught. That wasn't cultivated in boardrooms, but earned in battle. His eyes swept the showroom like a general surveying terrain. No one recognized him. Not yet. Claire stayed seated. She watched as Sean, the very same man who had dismissed her, spotted Marcus and perked up like a bloodhound catching a new scent. High-value target, his body language screamed. And just like that, the same man who'd tried to nudge her toward something more practical was now gliding toward Marcus like a butler on tiptoe. "Good afternoon, sir," Sean said with a practiced smile that reached all the way to his eyebrows. "Welcome to Sapphire Prestige. I'm Sean. How can I assist you today?" Marcus smiled back, effortlessly polite. "I'm interested in your premium line," he said, "the Revell GT in particular." Sean nearly lit up. "An excellent choice, sir. Our black model on the floor is one of the most exclusive vehicles we carry. Let me walk you through it." "I'd like to take a closer look," Marcus interrupted calmly, as Sean led him toward the vehicle. Yes, that vehicle, the same one Claire had been denied. Claire's heart began to pound. Yet she was used to watching her husband command boardrooms and negotiate million-dollar contracts. But watching him walk unknowingly into a trap set by men who had no idea he was their new boss, that was something else. Bradley Simmons emerged from his office just as Sean began pointing out the Revell GT's features. The manager's eyes locked on Marcus and his posture straightened instantly. "Good afternoon, sir," Bradley said, extending a hand. "Bradley Simmons, sales manager, it's a pleasure to meet you." "Marcus Bennett," he said, shaking his hand. No reaction. Bradley nodded, oblivious. "A pleasure, Mr. Bennett. I see Sean is showing you our Revell GT, a truly exceptional vehicle." "I'd like to arrange a test drive," Marcus said evenly. Bradley beamed. "Of course, we can have that prepared immediately. Would you like to review the vehicle specs while we handle the paperwork?" Marcus paused. His eyes scanned the room, then stopped on Claire. She met his gaze with a smile so small, so precise, it could have cut diamonds. "Actually," Marcus said, turning back to Bradley, "I'd like my wife to join us. She's been waiting to see this car as well." "Your wife?" Bradley asked, confusion flickering across his face. Marcus raised his voice just enough for the showroom to hear. "Claire, would you join us, please?" The effect was instantaneous. Heads turned, jaws slackened. Sean Carter's eyes widened as if someone had pulled the oxygen from the room. Claire rose from the couch in the lounge, the same pink cardigan draped over her shoulders, and walked slowly across the showroom floor. Every footstep was a verdict. "Hello, darling," she said, kissing Marcus on the cheek. Then she turned to Bradley, with the kind of pleasant smile that could only be described as devastating. "Mr. Simmons and I were just discussing this exact model earlier," she said brightly. "He was explaining why I couldn't test drive it." Marcus raised one eyebrow, now fully in character. "Is that so?" he said, tone cool. "I'd love to hear about that policy." And in that one moment, before the stammering, before the apologies, before the horror dawned on every staff member in the room, Claire knew. She hadn't come to buy a car. She had come to expose a culture. And now the whole showroom was about to learn who she was, and more importantly, who she had always been. The silence hit like a thunderclap. Bradley Simmons stood motionless, still gripping Marcus's hand, as if his body hadn't yet caught up with the realization dawning across his face. The words, "my wife," echoed through the luxury showroom, louder than the hum of the central AC or the murmur of idling engines or the soft classical music playing overhead. Employees froze mid-stride. One woman near the reception desk gasped and covered her mouth. Sean Carter, meanwhile, looked like a man watching his life flash before his eyes in high definition. Claire stepped beside Marcus with composure so precise it could slice through marble. The same woman who'd been dismissed, condescended to, and offered more practical options was now being stared at like a queen who had removed her cloak. "Mrs. Richardson?" Bradley stammered, grasping for a lifeline, misremembering the name from the ownership papers he hadn't bothered to study in full. "Bennett," Marcus corrected, his voice measured and steely. "Claire Bennett. As in, co-owner of Bennett Automotive Group. As in your new boss." The final word landed like a gavel in a courtroom. Claire didn't blink. "You see, Mr. Simmons," she said, turning to face him, "I came in today without any pretense. No titles, no appointments, no designer labels. I wanted to experience how this dealership treats everyday customers, how your staff responds to people who don't look like they walked out of a luxury catalog." She glanced at the now silent crowd around them. "And it turns out," she continued with calm precision, "you treat them like intruders." Bradley swallowed hard, his practiced smile gone, replaced by a thin sheen of sweat collecting at his temples. "If I'd known who you were." Claire held up a hand, silencing him with grace. "That's exactly the problem. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with dignity." Marcus let the moment stretch, studying his staff, who suddenly found the floor tiles intensely interesting. "Let me be clear," Marcus said, his tone soft but devastating. "This dealership was acquired because of its legacy. A legacy of high-end inventory, yes. But more importantly, a legacy of excellence. What I've seen today suggests that legacy has rotted into elitism." Bradley tried to interject, but Marcus continued. "Exclusivity is not the same as excellence. Discretion is not the same as discrimination." Claire stepped closer to Sean, who hadn't moved since the reveal. "Mr. Carter, when I arrived this morning, you evaluated me in less than 5 seconds. You made assumptions about my income, my worth, and my intent. You decided I didn't belong here, that I wasn't your kind of customer." Sean opened his mouth, but no sound came. Claire tilted her head gently. "I wonder how many other women, how many other customers, have walked through these doors and been shown the same invisible wall I was met with today." Another silence. A cold wind of reckoning swept through the showroom, and no one dared breathe too loudly. "I asked to test drive the Revell GT," Claire said, eyes scanning the gathered employees. "Not for a favor, not for pity, but because I am a paying customer with full intent to purchase. You refused me that opportunity. You judged me." "Mrs. Bennett," Bradley began, desperate now, "if there's anything we can do to rectify—" "I already have everything I need," Claire interrupted softly. "You showed me the truth. That's what I came for." Her voice remained kind, but it had a sharpness, an edge forged through years of being underestimated, of rising anyway. "I worked my way up from cashier to regional manager before Marcus and I ever met," she continued, her voice now reaching every corner of the room. "I've scrubbed floors, dealt with angry customers, and trained staff who looked down on me because they assumed my title didn't match my knowledge. So believe me when I say, I know exactly what bad culture smells like." She turned toward Marcus, who nodded gently. "Time to bring it all home." "We'll be implementing a full assessment tomorrow," Marcus announced. "New management protocols, staff evaluations, customer equity training, and yes, there will be transitions." The word transitions hit like a silent bomb. Bradley's face drained of what little color it had left. Claire wasn't finished. She stepped closer to him, lowering her voice so only he and Marcus could hear. "You used protocol as a weapon. You tried to humiliate me while pretending to be helpful. But here's the truth, Mr. Simmons. You didn't fail your job because you didn't recognize me. You failed it because you recognized only status." Bradley's mouth moved soundlessly. Then, with a broken breath, he finally said, I'm sorry." Claire gave a gentle smile. "Then prove it to the next woman who walks in wearing sneakers." With that, she turned back to Marcus. "We still driving the Revell?" she asked, a playful spark in her voice. Marcus grinned. "Absolutely." The young salesperson, Thomas according to his tag, stepped forward from the shadows, unsure whether he'd be reprimanded for speaking. "Mrs. Bennett? Mr. Bennett? Would you like me to prepare the vehicle for the test drive?" Claire smiled. "What's your name?" "Thomas Myers," he said, straightening. "Well, Thomas," she said, "you just earned yourself a future here." He exhaled, visibly relieved. "I'll get the keys." And just like that, the spell broke. The staff around them began to move again, quietly, cautiously. The reckoning had passed, but the transformation was just beginning. As Claire walked with Marcus toward the car, whispers filled the corners of the room again. But this time, they carried no mockery. They carried awe. Claire slid into the Revell GT with elegance, her hand brushing the steering wheel like it was an old friend. Marcus joined her on the passenger side. "Feel good?" he asked. She chuckled, adjusting the mirror. "You have no idea." The engine purred to life, and as the black Revell GT pulled out of Sapphire Prestige Motors, the staff left standing behind it understood one thing with aching clarity. They hadn't just lost a sale. They'd lost their illusion of superiority, and from now on, nothing in that showroom would ever be the same. The Revell GT purred down the curved edge of Market Street like a whisper carried on horsepower. Claire sat behind the wheel, posture poised but relaxed, her hands smooth and confident on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. She wasn't just test-driving a car. She was taking back space. Beside her, Marcus watched her with that quiet admiration only he could pull off. No grand gestures, no fawning comments. Just that soft, reverent silence, like he was witnessing a performance only he truly understood. "How's it feel?" he asked finally. Claire's lips curved, like poetry. The city blurred past in streaks of light and glass, San Francisco's sharp architecture towering above, its streets weaving old wealth with new ambition. But inside the cabin, there was only stillness, only the clean hum of electric assist engineering and the weight of everything that had just transpired. Claire exhaled slowly, letting the adrenaline drain from her limbs. "I wasn't sure I could stay calm in there," she admitted. "There was a moment when Sean said I wasn't the right fit. I swear I saw red." "You didn't show it." "Oh, I showed it," she replied. "Just not the way they expected." Marcus chuckled. "That's your power. You don't have to raise your voice to flip a building on its head." Claire laughed gently, the tension unwinding from her spine. "I didn't do anything special. I just stayed." That's exactly what made it special. They drove in silence for a few moments, turning past the edge of the marina, where the sun was beginning to stretch its gold across the water. Claire spoke again, quieter now. "You know what I kept thinking while I sat in that lounge? What would have happened if it hadn't been me? If it had been some working single mom saving for years to buy her first real car, or a retiree walking in after selling their family home. Someone without our resources or backup." Marcus nodded. "They would have walked out feeling smaller than when they came in." Claire tightened her grip slightly on the wheel. "And they would have believed it, that they weren't worthy, that they were the problem." He turned to her. "But you didn't let that happen." "No," she said, "I didn't." She looked at him, her eyes sharp again. "And I won't let it happen again." When they returned to Sapphire Prestige Motors an hour later, it felt like entering a different building. The staff, though still outwardly professional, no longer walked with the smug rhythm of unchallenged authority. Eyes were cast down more often. Voices spoke in measured tones, and yet, beneath the discomfort, something else lingered. Hope. The uncertain, fragile kind. Claire handed the keys back to Thomas, who met her gaze with respectful steadiness. "How was it, Mrs. Bennett?" "Exquisite," she said, "and thank you for not assuming." He flushed slightly. "You're welcome, ma'am." Marcus gave Claire a subtle nod. It was time. They stepped into the center of the showroom. Marcus cleared his throat. "Everyone," he said calmly, "may I have your attention, please?" The staff gathered slowly, some already bracing for a storm. Others glanced nervously at Bradley's office door, still closed, blinds drawn. Marcus continued. "My name is Marcus Bennett, and as some of you now know, my wife Claire and I are the new owners of Sapphire Prestige Motors. We've spent the last 2 decades building a network of automotive dealerships built not just on inventory, but on respect, on service, on culture." A few nods, a few flushed faces. Sean lingered at the edge of the group, shoulders stiff. Today, Marcus said, was supposed to be a quiet visit. Claire and I wanted to observe how things operate when leadership isn't watching. Claire stepped forward now, her voice even but resolute. And what we witnessed was a culture of assumption, a showroom where perception determines value, and where protocol is weaponized to exclude rather than invite. A murmur of discomfort ran through the group. She went on, "We are not here to punish. We are here to rebuild. That begins tomorrow, with training, with audits, with honest conversations. And with transitions," Marcus added firmly, "there will be staffing changes. Those unwilling to grow with us will be let go. But those who are willing to unlearn bad habits and commit to a new standard, you'll have every opportunity to thrive." Silence. Then a single voice. "What about Mr. Simmons?" one of the junior saleswomen asked cautiously. Claire met her gaze. "He'll no longer be with us." Sean opened his mouth, perhaps to defend his mentor, perhaps to protest, but then closed it again. Even he knew the tide had turned. Claire addressed him directly. "Sean, this morning you embarrassed me, not because you didn't know who I was, but because you decided who I was. Without asking, without listening. That's a pattern that will no longer be tolerated in any store with our name on it." He nodded, visibly swallowing hard. "Understood, Mrs. Bennett." By the next morning, news of the shakeup had traveled fast. Bradley Simmons was gone. Sean Carter submitted his resignation before the day's end. In their place, Claire personally promoted 2 internal team members, Thomas Myers, the respectful young salesperson who had treated her like a human being, and Erica Liu, a finance associate who had quietly advocated for more inclusive sales practices, but had been overlooked for years. Under Claire's guidance, the team underwent immersive equity training, not from an HR handbook, but from lived experience. She shared stories, invited former customers, created role-play simulations that made privilege visible and bias impossible to ignore. The culture began to shift, slowly but profoundly. 1 month later, Claire walked back into the dealership wearing the same outfit, same blouse, same pink cardigan, same quiet confidence. Thomas greeted her at the entrance with a smile that felt entirely earned. "Good morning, Mrs. Bennett. Here to see Mr. Bennett?" "Actually," she said, that familiar sparkle returning to her voice, "I'm here as a customer today. I'd like to test drive the Revell GT." He didn't blink. "Absolutely. The keys are ready whenever you are." She smiled, and this time as she walked across the showroom, there were no stares, no whispers, no smirks, only doors opening and respect earned. Because some revolutions don't come with fire and fury. Some begin quietly, with a woman in soft shoes and a voice that refuses to be silenced. Claire stood once again at the heart of Sapphire Prestige Motors, this time not as a silent observer in the customer lounge, not as a dismissed browsing woman in soft shoes, but as a co-owner walking the floor with intent, her presence acknowledged, her role respected, not because of fear, but because of the change she had instilled. The sunlight that streamed through the glass walls was the same. The rows of glistening luxury vehicles were the same. Even the faint background music still played the same curated playlist of soft jazz and instrumental covers. But the air felt different. People looked up now, not in judgment, not in suspicion, but with attention, with care, with something that had been sorely missing before, humanity. Claire moved through the showroom with measured grace, greeting staff one by one, asking about their families, their career goals, the stories behind why they'd chosen to work here. It was no longer about image, it was about intention. And intent, she had always said, was where true service began. She paused by the customer lounge, that beige leather sofa, the spot where she'd been made a public spectacle just weeks ago. She walked over and sat in the exact place she had before, crossing her legs, relaxing into the seat, not with anxiety this time, but with quiet reflection. From here, she could still picture it all. Sean circling her like a hawk, Bradley summoning her into the glass-paneled office, the deliberate tone used to push her away without ever using the word no. The glances between employees, the amused smirks, the hushed laughter barely concealed by professionalism. And then her turning point. Her refusal to leave. Her decision to wait. That moment, seemingly small at the time, had changed everything. Claire ran a hand along the smooth armrest of the couch, as if grounding herself back into that precise instant where humiliation had threatened to unravel her composure, and where resolve had instead crystallized. A young employee passed by, a woman in her early 20s, clipboard in hand, slightly nervous. Claire looked up. "Excuse me," the woman said. "Are you Mrs. Bennett?" Claire smiled gently. "I am." I just wanted to say thank you." Claire raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For changing the way things are here. I joined just before the ownership changed and I was worried it would get worse, but it didn't. You made it better." Claire motioned for her to sit down beside her on the couch. "What's your name?" "Serena," she said, shifting nervously. "I work in delivery prep and finance verification. I used to be ignored a lot, now I'm heard." Claire studied her carefully. There was a sincerity in her eyes, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "Do you know what the most powerful seat in this whole building is, Serena?" Claire asked. Serena blinked. "The owner's office?" Claire smiled, tapping the cushion beneath them. "No. This one." Serena tilted her head. "The lounge." "This spot," Claire said. "Right here, where they tried to make me feel small. Where they tried to outweight my dignity. This is the seat where I decided they wouldn't win. And now it's the seat where change began." Serena looked down, clearly moved. Claire continued. "Never underestimate the power of simply staying, of saying I deserve to be here and meaning it, whether you're in a $1,000 suit or a canvas cardigan." Serena nodded slowly. "Thank you." Claire smiled. "You'll go far, keep speaking up." The young woman stood, steadier now. "Yes, ma'am." Claire watched her walk away, then turned her eyes once more to the showroom. Marcus was across the floor in conversation with two new hires, individuals they had deliberately recruited from non-traditional backgrounds. People with fire in their hearts and potential in their eyes, not just gloss on their resumes. Claire stood and joined them. The weeks that followed became a living case study in what transformation looked like from the ground up. Claire instituted a monthly empathy day, where all staff, regardless of rank, would role-play customers from different backgrounds, immigrants with language barriers, elderly clients unfamiliar with technology, young women buying their first car, disabled customers navigating accessibility challenges. She brought in former customers who had been ignored in other dealerships. Their testimonials became training gold. She replaced the laminated scripts with real conversations. Gone were the guidelines that began with "assess the customer's budget." In their place, "assess the customer's needs." The showroom changed, but more importantly, the eyes behind the smiles changed. Marcus watched it unfold with pride. He had always known Claire's strength. It wasn't loud or flashy, it didn't demand rooms, it transformed them. One particular Friday afternoon, Claire stood at the edge of the floor as a woman walked in. Late 50s, dressed in scrubs, exhaustion in her eyes and tension in her shoulders. Claire approached first. "Welcome to Sapphire Prestige," she said warmly. "How can we help you today?" The woman blinked, surprised. "Oh, I'm just looking." Claire nodded. "That's how all the best stories start." The woman smiled faintly. "I've never bought a new car. I've always driven hand-me-downs or whatever I could fix. But this year I said, why not me? You know?" Claire's voice softened. "I do, and I'm glad you said it." She glanced over her shoulder, spotting Serena nearby. "Serena, can you help this guest? She's our priority." Serena stepped forward with confident warmth. "Absolutely, Mrs. Bennett." As they walked off together, Claire stood still for a moment. That invisible wall she had encountered weeks ago, it was gone. And in its place stood bridges, built one moment, one voice, one act of courage at a time. The Revell GT, the car that had once symbolized exclusion, now sat by the entrance with a new sign next to it. "Ask us to drive it. No titles, no proof required. If you believe you belong here, we believe you do too." Some customers laughed when they saw it, some stared, but many paused, and some, just a few, teared up. Because sometimes, a dealership isn't just a place to buy cars. Sometimes it becomes a place to restore faith. And Claire Bennett had done just that, not with grand speeches or power plays, but with presence, with patience, and with the strength to sit still when the world tried to push her out. In a quiet cafe just 2 blocks from the dealership, the atmosphere was thick. Not with steam from cappuccinos or jazz drifting from the overhead speakers, but with shame. Bradley Simmons stirred his coffee with mechanical precision, eyes glazed over as if trying to stir his thoughts back into order. Across from him, Sean Carter sat slouched, tapping one foot rapidly against the chair leg. Neither man spoke for a while. Their fall from grace hadn't come with dramatic fireworks or public firings. It had come in silence. In paperwork, in closed-door HR meetings, in an envelope handed to each of them with the word termination printed in clear, unapologetic font. Sean finally broke the silence. She played us. Bradley didn't look up. She didn't play us. We played ourselves. Sean blinked. You're seriously taking her side? I'm saying, Bradley said slowly. We built our entire house on sand, and she showed up with a gust of truth. Sean scoffed. She came in looking like someone's retired nanny and expected to be handed a six-figure car with no questions. That's not how this business works. Bradley finally looked at him. Truly looked at him. And for the first time, there was no superiority in his gaze. Only something heavier. Regret. Do you remember that guy who walked in 3 months ago? Torn jeans, paint on his hands? You laughed and passed him off to Mike? He ended up buying 2 SUVs. In cash. So? Sean muttered. Bradley leaned in. So maybe she wasn't the first one we underestimated. Maybe she's just the first who made sure we'd remember it. That silence, Sean. They both stared out the window toward the direction of Sapphire Prestige Motors, now just a gleaming structure on the edge of their professional memory. She's turning that place into something we wouldn't recognize, Bradley said. Something we never dared to imagine. Sean didn't reply, but his eyes darkened, because in truth, he did recognize it. He recognized that Claire Bennett wasn't just the co-owner of a dealership. She was the symbol of everything they'd been blind to. Integrity, dignity, grace. All cloaked in soft clothes and a sharper mind than either of them ever respected. Back inside Sapphire Prestige, Claire was walking the floor again, not as a boss overseeing work, but as a leader checking in on transformation. She watched as Serena explained financing options to a single dad who had brought his daughter with him. Claire noticed how Thomas walked an elderly man through the Revell GT's tech features at half speed, never once rushing or patronizing him. This was what she wanted. Not just change in policy, but change in heart. And it was working. A subtle hush fell as she approached the reception desk. Behind it sat a new team member, a tall woman with natural curls pulled into a bun and reading glasses perched on her nose. Her name tag read, Dana Hollis. Claire leaned on the counter gently. How's your first week? Dana looked up and smiled. Honestly, it's the first place I've worked where my ideas didn't get written off before I finished saying them. Claire nodded with quiet pride. You deserve that. Everyone does. Dana paused. Mrs. Bennett, can I ask something? Of course. Why didn't you fire everyone? Claire laughed softly. Because firing people doesn't fix culture. Replacing one set of assumptions with another solves nothing. But accountability? That's the only real start. Dana nodded thoughtfully. And besides, Claire added, sometimes the best lesson is making people face what they missed out on. Just then, the glass doors opened. A couple walked in, mid-30s, modestly dressed, clearly unsure if they belonged. They paused just past the threshold. Scanning the polished room, Claire caught the look. She walked over immediately. Welcome to Sapphire Prestige. I'm Claire, she said warmly. How can we help you today? The woman hesitated. We're just browsing. We weren't sure if this place is for you, Claire finished kindly. Well, it is, I promise. The man looked relieved. We've been saving for years for our first brand new car. Every place we went before, it felt like we were being tested the moment we walked in. Claire smiled. Not here. She waved to Thomas across the room. Thomas, would you take care of our guests? He approached immediately. Absolutely. As Claire stepped back, she watched the couple relax as they followed Thomas toward a sleek, mid-sized sedan. They no longer walked like intruders. They walked like customers. In the executive suite above the showroom, Marcus stood by the window, arms folded, watching the interaction unfold below. When Claire stepped into the office behind him, he didn't turn. She's good, he said. Who? That couple. The woman's already made up her mind. She just needed to feel seen. Claire stepped beside him. And now she is. Marcus turned to her, studying her face. You've done more than fix this place. You've redefined it. Claire tilted her head. No. I've reminded it who it's supposed to be. He smiled. You want to expand this model, don't you? She didn't deny it. I think we have a dozen dealerships that need the same wake-up call, she said. Not just new management, but new meaning. He reached out and squeezed her hand. Let's do it. Together. 3 weeks later, Claire sat on the same couch in the same lounge for a local news interview. The journalist leaned forward. Why this approach? Why not just rebuild under your name and forget the past? Claire smiled thoughtfully. Because forgetting is what got us here. Remembering is what will make us better. The journalist nodded. Do you think customers care about those kinds of internal changes? Claire looked into the camera and answered, not just for the interviewer, but for every viewer who had ever been overlooked, undervalued, or underestimated. They care the moment it happens to them. And in homes across the city, across the country, someone paused their dinner. Someone looked at their clothes. Someone remembered the last time they walked into a place and were told, without words, that they didn't belong. And then they saw Claire Bennett. Not shouting. Not seeking revenge. Just walking into the same showroom and turning the floor into a platform for truth. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Not in the showroom. Not in the corporate office. And certainly not in Claire Bennett's home office, where an inbox that once held routine dealership inquiries now pulsed with national media requests, partnership offers, and letters, real letters from people who saw themselves in her quiet defiance. It began with the local news segment. Claire's calm but powerful response. They care the moment it happens to them, had gone viral within 48 hours. Not through outrage, not through hashtags, but through resonance. Middle-aged couples sent emails recounting how they'd been turned away in similar showrooms. Retirees said they'd stop shopping for new vehicles altogether. Women wrote with trembling gratitude, "You gave us back something we didn't even know we'd lost. Permission to expect respect." Marcus sat across the dining table, flipping through a folder of speaking requests. "You're a brand now," he said, half amused, half amazed. "Not the business, you." Claire smiled but didn't look up. "I'm not interested in being a brand." "Well, the industry thinks you are. National Dealer Magazine just put you on the shortlist for their Person of the Year." "I didn't do anything spectacular," she replied. "That's the point," Marcus said, leaning forward. "You didn't yell. You didn't expose them on social media. You sat down. You endured. You waited. And then you changed everything by standing up and saying, 'No more.' That's more powerful than any campaign we've ever launched." Claire folded the letter in her hand and placed it into a new pile. It was from a 17-year-old girl who had been denied an internship at a dealership in Michigan because they weren't sure she'd be a cultural fit. She had written, "Your story made me reapply. I'm not hiding who I am anymore." Claire blinked a few times and pressed her palm to the table to steady herself. "I don't want to become a symbol," she murmured. Marcus reached across and gently took her hand. "Then become something more. Become the standard." At Sapphire Prestige Motors, the ripple effects of Claire's stand had matured into a daily rhythm. Walk-ins were welcomed without assessment. Test drives were offered based on curiosity, not credit scores. Customer experience was no longer a department. It was the floor's heartbeat. And Claire wasn't alone in carrying the weight of that transformation. Employees began proposing their own initiatives. Multilingual welcome brochures, mentorship programs for women in auto sales, a quiet room for overwhelmed clients, and even partnerships with local shelters to offer vehicle servicing at discounted rates. Every suggestion wasn't just heard, it was implemented. And across the Bennett Automotive Group, other locations took notice. In Dallas, a middle-aged veteran named Mr. Ellis walked into a Bennett-owned dealership wearing scuffed boots and a faded army jacket. 3 weeks earlier, he'd been asked at a competing store to come back with your supervisor. This time, he was greeted by a woman named Tasha, who offered him a bottle of water and asked, "Are we finding something for work or pleasure today?" He smiled and bought his first new truck on the spot. When asked what changed, he replied, "Claire Bennett." In Miami, a Latina nurse named Rosa had been talked over in 6 different dealerships. When she entered Bennett South, she was paired with a bilingual consultant who listened first and recommended second. By the time she left with her new hybrid SUV, Rosa was in tears, not from the purchase, but from being treated like her time mattered. And back in San Francisco, something unexpected happened. Sean Carter returned, not in a suit, not with bravado, but with humility. He requested a meeting, not with Marcus, but with Claire. She sat across from him in a neutral conference room, a glass of water between them. The same man who once measured customers by the thickness of their wallets now looked thinner in spirit, less composed, but more honest. "I came to say thank you," he said, voice lower than she remembered. Claire didn't answer, waiting. "You were right," he continued. "I judged people before I even knew their names. I believed appearance equaled capacity. That's what I was taught. That's what I rewarded. And it cost me everything." "It cost other people more," Claire said quietly. "People who walked away thinking they weren't enough." He nodded, the weight of that truth visibly settling on his shoulders. "I'm trying to change that now. I'm working with a local community center, teaching interview prep, helping high school students build confidence before they apply for jobs." She studied him, her expression unreadable. "I don't expect forgiveness," he added. "I just wanted you to know I finally saw it, what I was blind to before." Claire offered him something he hadn't earned, but something she believed in deeply, a nod. "Keep doing the work," she said, "and if you fall, get up cleaner than you were before." That night back home, Marcus found Claire in the garden. She knelt beside a row of lavender, her fingers dusted with soil, her expression distant and peaceful. "Long day?" he asked. "Beautiful day," she said. He crouched beside her. "Sean came to see you." She nodded. "Did it help?" Claire looked up, her eyes calm. "Yes, not because he apologized, but because he's building something better now." She reached into the soil again, pressing down a seedling. Growth doesn't happen on showroom floors. It happens underground, quiet, slow, but it changes everything. Marcus exhaled and kissed the top of her head, and the woman who once sat ignored in a lounge chair now sat beneath stars, planting a legacy that would outlive every engine, every model, every logo. Because some women don't just own dealerships, they drive change. The call came just before sunrise. Claire was in the kitchen, barefoot on cool tiles, pouring cream into her coffee as the first blush of morning rolled over the San Francisco hills. The house was still, the garden misted with dew, and the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the distant call of a mourning dove. Then her phone buzzed once, then again. By the third buzz, Claire's instincts told her it wasn't routine. She wiped her hands, picked up the phone, and saw the name. Elaine Miles, Editor-in-Chief, American Automotive Monthly. Claire took a breath. She hadn't spoken with Elaine in nearly 5 years. Not since an interview about emerging women leaders in the auto business, a feature that never ran after a last-minute editorial change. She answered. "Elaine?" "Claire, I know it's early." Elaine's voice crackled through with urgency. "But we just pulled the trigger. You're our next cover story." Claire blinked. "I didn't even know I was being considered." "You weren't, until last night. We killed our original feature. We're pivoting the whole issue." Claire moved to the window, the morning light catching the edge of her face. "Why now?" "Because what you did, what you're still doing, just sparked a national chain reaction. There's a dealership in Atlanta, rewriting its policies to model after yours. A CEO in Detroit just resigned after an undercover audit exposed discriminatory practices, and the story keeps pointing back to Sapphire Prestige. To you." Claire turned toward the sink, setting her mug down gently. Elaine continued. "You've started a conversation the industry has avoided for decades. We've got dealership owners calling us, asking for training templates, auto schools requesting your interview transcript. This isn't just a story, Claire. It's a blueprint." Claire let that settle in. "You don't need to pose in a luxury car," Elaine said. "In fact, we want the opposite. A photo of you in that pink cardigan. Maybe seated, like you were the day it all changed." Claire exhaled. "Let's do it." The article dropped a week later under the headline, "The Woman Who Changed the Room Without Raising Her Voice." It was unlike anything the industry had seen. No statistics led the article. No glossy photo shoots, just the story, raw, human, and painfully familiar to thousands. Within days, Claire's words were quoted on dealership walls, LinkedIn posts, internal company memos. Major car brands issued statements on re-examining equity across customer experiences. 3 dealerships across the West Coast voluntarily shut down for 48 hours to implement empathy workshops. Claire offered her time to help design the curriculum. Free of charge. I'm not building a brand, she told every interviewer. I'm building better rooms. At Sapphire Prestige, things had transformed from local ripple to industry epicenter. Prospective employees now asked, "Will I get to work with Mrs. Bennett?" Customers booked flights from out of state to shop with her team. Not because the prices were lower, but because the treatment was different. Claire launched a new initiative across the Bennett Automotive Group, the Standard Seat Project. Each dealership now kept one designated seat in its lounge, a simple chair with a plaque. This is where our story changed. All guests are equal here. Some mocked it online at first. A seat won't fix systemic bias. But others, mothers, veterans, teenagers, immigrants, posted selfies in that seat with captions like, "I sat here, and I was seen. Didn't buy a car today, but for the first time, I wasn't made to feel like I couldn't." A seat became a stand. One afternoon, Claire was walking the floor when Marcus approached holding a manila folder. "You need to see this," he said. Inside were letters, dozens, all from employees at other dealerships who had implemented Claire's equity model. One line stood out from a floor manager in Arizona. "We stopped trying to figure out who looked like a buyer and started figuring out who looked like they needed to be treated with dignity. That changed everything." Claire smiled, but Marcus wasn't done. "There's something else," he said. "The National Automotive Equity Council wants you to keynote their conference, first female speaker in over a decade." Claire raised her eyebrows. "Let me guess, they want me to talk about customer satisfaction?" "No, they want you to talk about culture shock." She laughed. "That I can do." A month later, Claire stood behind a podium in a room of 900 dealership owners, executives, and industry veterans. Some looked curious, some looked threatened, all looked awake. She didn't use slides, she didn't read notes. She told them a story. About a chair, about a cardigan, about walking into a place where you weren't wanted and walking out owning it, about listening more than talking, about seeing more than selling. And then she said the words that would be quoted for years. "Luxury doesn't start with chrome or horsepower. It starts with how you make people feel the moment they walk through your doors. And if you only serve the people who already look like they belong, you're not running a luxury business. You're running a club." The room went still. Then it erupted. Applause, real applause. And afterward, a line of executives wrapped around the ballroom, waiting, not for a photo, not for a pitch, but for a moment to say, "You changed how I see my customers. You changed how I see myself." That night, Claire sat alone in her hotel room, the applause still echoing in her chest. She looked at a text from Serena. "A woman cried in the lounge today. She said she was never called ma'am in a dealership before. Just sweetheart or hon." She sat in the seat. Claire replied simply, "That's why we keep it empty, so the right person always has a place." She stood, walked to the hotel window, and looked out over the city, its streets lit like arteries, its buildings breathing like lungs. The world was still flawed, still unfair, still unpredictable. But now, there was one more place in it where a person could walk in, sit down, and feel seen. And that, Claire thought, was enough to keep going. A soft rain fell over San Francisco, giving the city that cinematic blur, the kind where streetlights streak like dreams across windshields and umbrellas bloom like flowers in slow motion. At Sapphire Prestige Motors, the glass shimmered beneath the gray sky, but inside it was warm, lively, transformed. Claire stood at the threshold of the showroom, her coat damp at the shoulders, a reusable umbrella folded at her side. She shook off the rain like memory, eyes scanning the familiar space, not with hesitation, but with appreciation. Every corner of the showroom now pulsed with quiet integrity. Employees greeted customers not by profile, but by presence. Conversations began with questions, not assumptions. And in the far corner, next to the Revell GT, still shining as a centerpiece, stood the chair. The lounge hadn't changed its layout. Claire had insisted it stay exactly as it was. Let the walls and windows change, let the staff and slogans evolve. But that chair, that seat of reckoning, had become sacred. It bore a new plaque now. "This is the seat where exclusion ended. Sit here and know you matter." She approached it slowly, but she didn't sit this time. This time she brought someone else. "Take a seat," she said gently, turning to the girl beside her. She was no older than 19, with deep brown eyes and a backpack still clinging to her shoulder like she wasn't sure if she could really stay. The girl hesitated. "I don't belong here," she whispered. "These cars are worth more than my entire life." Claire smiled. "Funny, that's exactly how I felt the first time I sat here." The girl looked at her. "But you're you. And I wasn't when I walked through that door," Claire said, sitting beside her now. "I was dismissed, laughed at, told I wasn't the right fit. This very seat held the weight of humiliation, and then, a few minutes later, it held the first spark of change." The girl swallowed. "I didn't even want to come today. My cousin said you help people like us. But I didn't believe him." "Believe him," Claire said, "because I don't help people like you. I am people like you." The girl wiped at her sleeve, embarrassed by her tears. Claire reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a handwritten letter, the ink slightly smudged. "This," she said, handing it to her, "was sent to me by a woman from Ohio. She was denied a test drive 2 months ago. After hearing our story, she tried again. Same dealership. This time she brought her daughter. She said she needed them to see how strong she was." The girl read silently, eyes widening. Claire continued, "She didn't need to be rich, she just needed to be received. That's what we do now, we receive." "I want to be like you," the girl whispered. "Not famous, just seen." Claire's heart ached. In that way, only truth can sting. "You already are," she said. "But if you want to come work with us, I can show you how to make others feel the same." The girl blinked. "Really? We have an apprenticeship program. You'd be learning everything. Sales, service, empathy, policy writing. You won't just work in a dealership, you'll reshape it." The girl nodded, speechless. Claire stood. "Come on, let me introduce you to Thomas. He started just like you. Quiet, unsure. Now he's our youngest floor manager." The girl stood too, slowly, still clutching the letter. But before they walked away, she turned and looked at the chair one last time. "I won't forget this," she whispered. Claire smiled. "That's why we kept the seat." Later that evening, after the girl had filled out her paperwork, met the staff, and left with a new glint of belief in her step, Claire walked the floor alone. The lights were dimming. The rain had slowed. The Revell GT sat still and proud. Marcus entered from the office, loosening his tie. "You're still here." "She sat in the chair," Claire said. "Another one?" Claire nodded. She thought she didn't matter. "And now? She's about to prove she does." Marcus smiled and slipped an arm around her waist. "You've turned a dealership into a classroom." Claire leaned against him. "I've turned a moment into a movement." He kissed her forehead. "And it all started," she said, looking back toward the lounge, with the word no. That weekend, Sapphire Prestige hosted its first open access day, where customers were invited to test drive any model, no questions asked. No appointments, no pre-approvals, just curiosity and respect. Families came, students came. People who had never dared to walk into a showroom came. They were greeted with smiles, offered refreshments, treated like decisions, not statistics. Claire stood at the welcome desk, watching each person come through the door. One man, early 60s, weathered hands, baseball cap pulled low, hesitated at the entrance. Claire walked to meet him. "Welcome," she said. He looked around, skeptical. "Y'all really letting folks like me test these cars?" Claire smiled. "You're not folks like you. You're someone with a story, and we'd like to hear it." He stared at her for a long beat, then nodded. "All right, let's drive." That evening, Claire returned to the lounge for one last moment of reflection. The chair sat quietly, a monument to transformation. And in that quiet, she whispered, "Let every room I enter become a room where someone else dares to believe they belong. Because revolution doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits, in silence. And then it rises, and changes the world." 1 year later, on the anniversary of that quiet, defiant moment in the customer lounge, Claire Bennett arrived at Sapphire Prestige Motors before the sun had even crested the skyline. She moved through the still dark showroom like someone walking through memory. The Revell GT was still there. The walls had been updated, the staff had grown, but the seat, the one simple lounge chair, remained untouched. A single spotlight had been installed to gently illuminate it at night. It no longer needed to be explained. It had become sacred. Today wasn't about press. It wasn't about celebration. It was about remembering the moment Claire said nothing and let the silence speak for her. She took a seat, not in the chair, but beside it, on a wooden stool. In her hands, she held a thin binder, on its cover, embossed in gold, the Dignity Directive. Inside it were 43 pages of policies, practices, and training guidelines that had reshaped 12 Bennett-owned dealerships and inspired over 200 more across the country. Her words, once dismissed in a glass-walled office, were now being studied in leadership seminars, cited in ethics conferences, and adopted by corporate boards. The industry hadn't just listened, it had begun to change. But Claire wasn't interested in applause. She was interested in what would outlive her. The glass doors opened. Marcus entered with 2 people flanking him, a young woman in a cream suit and thick braids, and a soft-spoken teenage boy who looked at everything like it might disappear. Claire stood. "This," Marcus said with pride, "is Janae, our new Director of Customer Integrity. And this is Terrence, our youngest equity ambassador. He wrote a letter asking to intern before his 18th birthday." Terrence reached out awkwardly. Claire shook his hand. "It's an honor," he said quietly. "I read everything about you." "Good," Claire replied. "Now it's your turn to write the next chapter." Janae stepped forward. "We've finalized it," she said, lifting a duplicate binder. "Every dealership in the Bennett Group is adopting the Dignity Directive, starting today." Claire smiled. "What about the name?" Janae beamed. "We're renaming our customer program." She stepped aside and Terrence lifted a small cloth from a mounted plaque nearby. Beneath it read, "The Claire Bennett Standard. A commitment to welcome, a promise to listen, a policy of human first." Claire covered her mouth. Her eyes welled. Not out of vanity, but because a single act of dignity, resisted and defended, had blossomed into something immovable. A promise with a name with weight. That afternoon, the news broke. Major national chains announced they were reevaluating their policies to meet the Bennett standard. Online communities launched campaigns, encouraging others to share stories where they'd been seen or ignored. And Claire's quiet face, in her cardigan and soft smile, began appearing beside hashtags like, "The Standard Seat," "Customer First Always," "Dignity Doesn't Have a Dress Code." In the months that followed, Claire received thousands of letters, from families, veterans, students, mothers, but one stood out. It came in a plain white envelope. No return address. Inside was a note on torn paper. "I was the man who laughed when you asked for a test drive. I'm no longer in the industry, but I remember you every day. Not because you exposed me, but because you didn't humiliate me back. You just showed me who you were. And that made me see who I was. I'm working on being better now. Thank you for not yelling. Thank you for showing me the power of restraint." Claire stared at the letter for a long time, then folded it and placed it in the back of her binder. There were lessons in silence. And sometimes even those who resisted change found their way through its echo. 1 year later, the chair in the lounge gained a new symbol, a small engraved plate, added just beneath the original plaque. For every person who was ever asked to prove they belonged, this seat was for you. Claire stood beside it as a crowd gathered for Sapphire Prestige's annual Dignity Day. Schools had brought students, veterans arrived with their families, local politicians had shown up, but none dared give speeches. Not today. Because this wasn't about policy, it was about people. Claire stepped up to the mic with no script. "I'm not here to be honored," she said. "I'm here to honor the moment I was told no." A hush fell. Because in that no, I found everything I needed to say yes to others, to those still overlooked, to the future I wanted to live in. She turned toward the chair. It sat quietly, as it always had. Its power didn't come from status. It came from what it asked of people, to look again, to listen harder, to treat others not with suspicion, but with sincerity. Claire turned back to the crowd. "Let this chair be your reminder. Every room has a seat of power, and sometimes it looks nothing like what you expect. Sometimes it's just soft fabric beneath the weight of someone daring to be seen." She stepped down and let the moment speak for itself. Back home late that night, Marcus lit a candle in their garden. Claire joined him, wrapping her arms around his waist. They stood together, breathing in the scent of lavender, the air rich with memory. "You've changed things," Marcus whispered. "We've changed them," she replied. "No," he said, kissing her temple. "You sat down and lifted an entire industry." Claire looked up at the stars and smiled. "Then let the next woman sit down," she whispered. "And may the world rise to meet her. Because one seat, one voice, one moment of stillness can start a movement that never stops. To anyone watching this and thinking, that chair could have been mine, you're right. And maybe it was. We've all been in rooms where we were unseen, unheard, underestimated. But remember this, you don't need status to be powerful. Sometimes, all it takes is refusing to stand down when they want you silent. Because respect doesn't wear a price tag. And dignity? That starts the moment you decide you belong, no matter what they say. If this story moved you, share it. Let someone else sit in that chair. And if you've ever been told you didn't look the part, just remember, neither did she. Now look what she built.